So I think we'll just wait for a couple of minutes for everybody to join.
Sure.
So I think we should start. Aniket, I'll go ahead and start the conversation. So hello everyone, a very good evening to you all, and thanks for joining us today for the session. For those who might not have interacted with me in the past, I'm Smriti Agarwal Gambhir, and I'm part of the investor relations team at IN. We are all aware that Gen AI is the new buzzword in the startup world today, be it India or globally. In today's session, we are looking to understand how Gen AI will impact the startup ecosystem and how it will help shape the Indian startup ecosystem landscape. We have with us today Mr. Aniketh MJ, who's AVP Investments at Ideaspring Capital. Aniketh was previously on the leadership team at Bizongo, where he headed the business intelligence and client experience functions. He has also been on the global growth team of Zomato and helped launch the table reservations business and product. At Ideaspring Capital, Aniketh has been seeing startups in the Gen AI space for the last 18 months. These are, of course, early stage companies seeking seed investment. So this time, Aniketh has looked at Gen AI use cases across video, audio, text, across functions in industries like media, e-commerce, healthcare, and BFSI. So we'll be having Aniketh take us through some key information through his deck, and then we'll open up the session for Q&A. I would request all participants to feel free to put their questions in the Q&A box through the session, and Aniket can take them up post, he can post him sharing the information. So on that note, Aniket, I'd like to pass the baton to you, and please, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Smriti, for having me, and to the India Angel Network team for giving me this opportunity to share my learnings. I think, like Smriti said, my experience with generative AI, I mean, to be totally honest, I had no inkling of what the word was even, let's say, 24 months back. But I think with all of the development that we've seen in the space in the last, more so in the last 6 to 12 months, but actually for a few years prior to that as well, my job requires me to stay abreast of what's happening in the world of technology, and meeting startups doing exciting stuff is part and parcel of what I end up doing when I evaluate them from an investment standpoint. So that led me to the world of generative AI and understanding what startups are doing in the space, and I'll share some of my learnings from there. So just to give you a little brief of what we do at Ideaspring Capital. So we are an early stage venture fund, primarily investing in the B2B space. We started in the year 2016 with the whole sort of thesis that B2B products can be built in India and scaled globally. The idea was to find these startups fairly young, invest in them, and actually be a part and parcel of their journey as they scale up. So in terms of the criteria that we use to evaluate a lot of these startups, we give a lot of importance to technology being a key differentiator. So that allows us to actually invest in a lot of these startups even at a pre-revenue stage. So I think 75% of our investments so far have been at a pre-revenue stage, as long as product is sort of ready. And we then help them find markets and help them scale up. So we're now currently operating out of our second fund. The first fund was roughly 120 crore fund. We made investments in 16 companies. We've already seen 4 exits by acquisition. That led us to, or that gave us the conviction to launch a second fund with a similar thesis as well. We launched that in July of 2021. This is a slightly larger fund, 250 to 300 crore fund. We are still in the process of closing it, but we've been actively investing out of that and made 8 investments till date. And we haven't invested any in the generative AI space. I personally am hoping we end up doing 1 or 2 in the space, but we continue to speak to a lot of startups in this space that we believe is sort of up and coming and showing a lot of legs to sort of stand on. In terms of, I'll jump into what generative AI is, and I'm sure you've all come across definitions, played around with ChatGPT, etc. But I think to me, what generative AI is it's basically a type of artificial intelligence, or it's a derivation of artificial intelligence, where the whole sort of purpose is to create new data such as images, text, or music, and not just by by analyzing existing data that already exists. But the whole difference between this and any forms of AI that you've seen in the past is that there's always an element of new content being created. I think the best way to sort of explain this is from the analogy of chatbots, and I'm sure you all use chatbots in your favorite consumer-facing app over the last 6-7 years. So I think when you started using chatbots, when you say are trying to track an order on Flipkart or Zomato, I think you used to see a lot of you'd input text, you'd get a response, and the shape and form of that response would largely be defined by rules that were created. So, and I think we've all been frustrated by the inability of that chatbot to actually be quote unquote smart. So I think we see that sometimes the answers get very, very repetitive. So that's a form of artificial intelligence, but the ability of that system to create new content basis inputs that you're providing did not exist, which now we are seeing more of. So I think the major sort of implication of what generative AI has been able to showcase is that it's largely conversation led and human language led. So you're actually conversing with a with an artificial entity, and that understands you and gets smarter with time and gives you the responses that are better than rule-based responses that you would have seen in the past. In terms of, I think the main difference we've seen is, I mean, we've been talking about big data a lot, and we've been talking about the ability of intelligent systems to be able to analyze data. But I think now we are seeing a lot of applications on the creativity side, be it in images, text, video, music, etc., where new data altogether is being created, which I think is what is appealing to a lot of people, and which is what we've seen is leading to the rise in usage as well. So why now specifically? I think the largest reason for this is, and we'll go into this in a lot more depth, but I think the largest reason for this is largely basis the amount of data that's being analyzed today. If you see the chart on the left, you will see that from earlier times to now, you see that the number of parameters being used in models to make it smarter and smarter has increased so much to the extent that now the responses coming out of these models are useful or are acceptable to people to actually sort of take decisions, etc. So I think that's largely been because of multiple reasons, but better computing, more data being available, more data being created, which is therefore training a lot, or the base data on which a lot of these new models have been created are being trained on a lot more parameters. Therefore, the responses that are coming out are becoming more and more accurate. I think in terms of how AI has also evolved, you could see that initially it was largely about AI being able to do OCR, which is which could recognize certain objects, etc., in text. I think OCR, biggest application for OCR you see is analyzing of financial statements that a lot of banks, etc., do. but also with speech to text, etc. AI got better at speech. You've seen it with a lot of your devices that you might have at home, be it Siri, Alexa, etc. To then being able to identify images, and now eventually it can identify text as well or understand text as well, and being able to use all of this data to provide an output that is much better than what has been sort of created in the past. I think the simplicity of applications that have come out of it, ChatGPT being a great example, is also the biggest reason for why adoption has been so high. I think we've seen a lot of good applications come up in the past that took some time to scale up, but I think the time to reach 100 million monthly active users in months, ChatGPT hit that number in 2 months, and we've not seen anything as impressive as that. I think because it was created largely for anybody who could type into a web-based interface. You didn't need to download anything. You didn't need to know any, or you didn't need to have any sort of technical prowess to be able to interact with the app, with the application. Made the whole simplicity aspect of it the biggest reason for why adoption has been high as well. And I think we're going to see as other applications come up in this space as well, I think the focus on simplicity is going to be very, very high for adoption to increase basis the example that we've seen with ChatGPT. In terms of, I think you'd have all come across investments in the space, and being angel investors yourselves, I'm sure you've come across a lot of opportunities. So of course, I think on the global scale, we've seen a lot of activity in the last few years, of which specifically in the last couple of years, we have seen specifically a lot of activities. I think this is, of course, only all of the deals that have been disclosed. This data is specifically from CB Insights, but we'd see that a lot of deals are also not necessarily disclosed or are still under the wraps. So I think the actual number of funding in terms of both deal size and in terms of count of deals, I'm sure is much higher than the chart you see in the top left. I think OpenAI has been the biggest sort of what do you call it, influencer in terms of how adoption has increased, in terms of how it has championed the cause of using AI on a day-to-day basis. Even the funding that they've received and the current valuation that they stand at is testament to the great products or the great tech that has come out of there. But even in India specifically, I think I don't have the funding numbers off the top of my mind right now, but I think you see a lot of applications that have made headway in different spaces, video, cataloging, research, audio, coding, etc. I'll specifically talk a little bit more about the video space, because that's where I saw a lot of startups initially when I started looking at generative AI, and I thought that's useful for us to try and understand how all of this fits in. How's generative AI going to evolve? I think the comic strip on the left encapsulates, I think, what one of the top VC firms, which is Andreessen Horowitz, also talks of. I think initially it was all about information that could be created. So provide a prompt and create information, or provide a prompt that leads to creation of new content or information. I think which is what I think appealed to a lot of end customers, end users, etc. I think we're going to see the wave move to more of convergence of information. So it started with divergence, and now it's going to move to convergence of information, where a lot of information is out there, but how do you make it crisper? How do you make it more concise? How do you make it more actionable or insightful to actually take decisions? I think even if you look at specifically what the objectives of generative AI in both the B2C and the B2B side of things have been, is I think on the B2C side, I think all of us have largely been fascinated by how fun it is to play with say a ChatGPT, to try out images on DALL-E or on Midjourney, and we end up sharing a lot of that content. I mean, writing new stories, etc. I think quality or correctness haven't really been very high priorities. I think even if you see even the difference between ChatGPT and Bard, ChatGPT says they don't take any publicly available data, whereas Bard also looks at publicly available data, you see that a lot of inaccuracies in data exists. I mean, you can write something uh, as sort of, you could want a question to be answered as specific as, hey, will India win the World Cup this year? And I think ChatGPT is capable of saying that it can or it will. Whereas you don't, and it's fun from a reading standpoint, but in terms of whether data like that can actually be accepted at the face of it all, or content can be accepted at the face of it all, and decisions can be taken basis that, I think we're still some time away from that. I think on the B2B side, when you specifically look at it, I think what the objective is around either seeing efficiencies or improvement on the time parameter or quality parameter. So either quality of uh, content is getting better and better in the same amount of time, or with generating the same quality of content but doing it at a much faster pace. I think if this can be specifically quantified, the adoption on the B2B side will specifically sort of get better and better. This talks a little bit more about the wave from B2C to B2B. So I think if you see specific functions like sales, marketing, customer success, product, and legal, the first wave that you saw, and that I think a lot of applications today are also built around, or how do you create more and more data or create more and more content. I think good example is we're looking at companies that, at least from the marketing standpoint, want to generate ad copy in a quicker, faster way without actually having people. So the creativity aspect of what needs to be done is now being sort of supplemented through by the use of technology through platforms like this. Whereas in wave two, I think we're going to see a lot more specific requirements that come out of it. I think I'll share the deck with all of you later as well. But I think just to sort of summarize what this is saying is, I think we're going to see more specific, quantifiable objectives that need to come out in the B2B side of things for it to actually be useful. So I think the graph on the right best sort of encapsulates that as well. We spoke about speed and quality being the two parameters basis which content that comes out of these generative AI applications, whether they will be useful and they'll see adoption and can they eventually be monetizable or not. I think only after it hits a certain threshold of speed and of quality, which is what you see in that dotted line on the top right. If it crosses that on either of those parameters is when I think we will see the real push coming through on the B2B side. B2C side, I think will continue to flourish. I mean, I spoke to a film producer recently, and he's actually managed to create a lot of content, especially around posters for his films, etc., using applications like Midjourney, which wasn't the case earlier. I mean, he needed to coordinate with an agency to get that created. They would take their own sweet time. There'd be a lot of iterations, and being tech savvy himself, he's managed to leverage a platform such as that to save time. So I think we're seeing people even on the one is, of course, non-creative people can use applications like this to also come up with creative work, but we're also seeing people in creative spheres itself using applications like this to improve either from a quality standpoint or from a time standpoint. I know this is a fairly heavy slide, and I'll do my best to sort of take you through what we are seeing. So I think when you look at overall opportunities in generative AI, it can be broken up into 6 levels. So the table on the left, you read it from down to up. So I think on the computer hardware level is where I think you can see the first opportunity. I think specifically AI requires a lot of computing power. Chips that need to be designed and created to compute a lot of this data needs to be fairly robust, needs to have the capacity to do so. We've seen, I think, at least on a chip design side, we've seen NVIDIA and Google being the leaders in this side. NVIDIA specifically, I think you would have all seen that it touched $1 trillion in valuation very, very quickly. I was just looking at the share price over a 5-year period, and they've actually gone up 500% in 5 years. So I think it's testament to the fact that they're at the right place to be where there's a sudden requirement to have the ability or to have chips that can really sort of bring out the best in terms of AI, that can bring out the best computational capability for AI to be on top of that. And I think on that front, companies like NVIDIA have dominated the market. I think the bar that you see right next to that talks about specifically, because I know the audience today is largely angel investors, and you might be seeing more of early stage startups. I think over a 3 to 5 year horizon, we are also trying to figure out where are the opportunities most likely going to be for a new entrant to create a mark. So now, understandably so, on the computer hardware side, the opportunity is lesser, because I think it's a place that will be more sort of tapped into by the existing incumbents that are there, because it's largely manufacturing, largely a hardware play, and for a new startup to come about and create a mark in this might take some time. But that said, existing players do have an opportunity to continue innovating and reap the benefits from the space, which is what I think will happen. Next level up is the cloud platforms layer. In the cloud platforms layer, we've seen AWS, Google, Microsoft largely be the leaders on the cloud side for a lot of these models, etc., to run, and the workloads that are associated with it. I think more and more people are using the existing cloud players. Again, it's a place where incumbents have existed for the last 5-10 years, and they've created a good enough market share for a new player to find it difficult to compete in this space, which is why, again, it is ranked low from the opportunity size standpoint. Next is the foundational models. It's slightly sort of, there's more of an opportunity to play here. Now, I know we've seen large language models largely around, which came about from OpenAI, GPT-2, GPT-3, etc., which we've seen have been trained on a lot of data. Even training a lot of these foundational models require a lot of time, effort, money to do so. You need a lot of data, you need ability to compute. So I think even a lot of money that goes into creating your own model, at least at a scale as large as what GPT, etc., is at, might be difficult. But that said, I think this ranks slightly higher than cloud platform and computer hardware, because we're seeing a lot of opportunity for smaller data sets, smaller models for specific proprietary use cases to sort of flourish. For instance, in the healthcare side, if you only want to work on data for a particular disease, or from a particular hospital, and create models on top of that, it's easier to do so, and you don't necessarily need to have the resources that OpenAI does. So opportunity to make a play in this exists for a startup, which it ranks better than cloud platform and computer hardware, but not as high as the next three that I'm going to speak of. I think model hubs and ML ops is the best analogy for this. Is I think when you talk about something like the California gold rush, when you finally, a lot of people migrated to California to dig and find gold themselves, and when you find people who were mining actually weren't the people who ended up making most money out of the gold rush. It was the people who were selling things like pots and pans to actually mine the gold. So I think the ancillary ecosystem that will allow for all of this to flourish might be the one that will that can sort of create, or that can capture a lot of value in the near term. We're going to see a lot of tech folks, engineers working on problems in this space, and I think anything that makes their job easier, there's an opportunity for startups to play in this space. I think we've seen even on the DevOps side, etc., even before AI became the buzzword, we've seen companies like Postman, Browser Stack, etc., do well. Similar to that, I think an analogy can be drawn that people that can help build applications on top of foundation models could potentially do well at this point. I'll cover services, and then I will get back to applications. So services are basically, I think one is we are talking about how to start a AI specific startup, but I think what's become obvious in the last many months is that everybody needs to have a AI strategy, or they run the risk of potentially becoming redundant. What this means is that one doesn't need to be centered around AI, but you need to know how you can leverage on AI to sort of make things faster, better, cheaper for you. And by that, I think there are a lot of players coming up that can operate on a service model basis, which would mean that you could partner with companies that can identify certain, if even if you're a big enterprise, you could partner with a company that understands AI applications and use cases in a good enough way to be able to figure out what's the best way to integrate that into your offering. I think chatbot example is again good. I mean, you have companies like Yellow.ai that might be working more on all of, or at least 4 or 5 of the aspects in the value chain. But even if you are a consumer facing app and you only use the traditional chatbot in the past, how is it that you can work with a service provider like a Yellow.ai to come up with a smarter chat, or to come up with a chatbot that you has more intelligence? So I think there are going to be a lot of service players that will operate in this space, that will handhold people and take them, either help build AI capability in-house or help them leverage on vendors that already exist. And I think that's again a place where there could be a potential opportunity for value to be created. Lastly, on the application side, which is what I think most of us have played around with, both on the B2B and B2C side, we are seeing a lot of applications come about. You don't need to create all aspects of the value chain, but you can sit on top of existing language models that exist and build wrappers or layers that will allow you to differentiate. I think speed to market uh, and and differentiability from a business model standpoint could give a company a competitive edge. And I think most of the startups that we're seeing today are more so on this. At least the large volume of startups are in this. I think large part of the money might have gone to companies that uh, have innovated more with their own models, etc. But one doesn't need to necessarily operate across all 6, and just as an application player as well, you could do fairly well. I'll go in further into the application side. I think within applications itself, we see ability to sort of innovate on the text, code, image, audio, 3D, and video space. And even if we move outside of functions within an organization, which is what I've shown above, in terms of other sectors as well, I think on the healthcare side, there are a lot of innovative use cases that can come about. I mean, in terms of new drugs, etc. I came across this a really interesting use case where I think the whole aspect of creating prosthetic limbs can see a big sort of uplift by using generative AI. So, for instance, data from IoT sensors that somebody who needs, let's call it a new prosthetic limb, is captured on a regular basis. Models can be used to actually figure out how the person is moving and what sort of a limb needs to be designed specifically for that use case. So it doesn't have to be standardized limbs. And then through 3D printing, etc., you can create something that previously at least might not have been as customized as what's possible today with all of the data that's available. I think on the finance side, we can see that specifically around analyzing financial data and preventing frauds, etc., you could use generative AI in a lot of innovative use cases. Again, on the education side, we've always seen a one-size-fits-all education system, be it online or offline. I think, again, through generative AI, you can have more customized offerings. Video, I'll specifically touch upon it in more depth, because we went through some use cases at a very close quarters at Ideaspring as well. So just before I go into the next slide, I think what's important to understand is what are the challenges associated with video. I think we've all seen statistics, or we all intuitively are aware of the fact that video is a very, very effective medium of communicating or of transferring information. I think I read somewhere that retention is as high as 85%, or is 85% higher than if you were to read something or hear something, if you watch something on a video. But the problem with video has always been that there are certain challenges associated with it. It's always been a very technical and expensive field. You need actors, film crews. It takes a lot of time. Post-production requires a lot of technical knowledge. And I think the ability to change or edit content once something is filmed is very difficult to do. And I think solutions on this side we've seen on the generative AI space. So we spoke to a lot of startups that were specifically solving for video or had incorporated different technologies like speech to text, audio cloning, voice dubbing, lip sync correction, all of these that would make for a bad video experience. Even for instance, you're watching your favorite movie and or you're watching a movie from a different country and you want to see it in a language that you are familiar with or comfortable with, but the whole lip syncing and dubbing experience, is not great. I think generative AI helps solve for things like that. So these are certain use cases that we thought were interesting, but even in the enterprise side, I think what we did was when we spoke to a lot of these startups and asked them what are the pilots currently in operation, we wanted to break it down on an industry by industry basis and see how generated videos specifically in certain sectors could have a much larger impact. So this was actually like a reverse pitch exercise that we did with a startup. So where a startup said that, hey, I have this technology that allows people to make faster, cheaper videos in a synthetic way. And I'm thinking of this use case. So we actually decided that let's pick a particular industry. So let's say e-commerce, for instance, and how is it that synthetic video can be utilized across functions within e-commerce itself. So for instance, when you ordered or when you're browsing through a online website and haven't taken the decision to order something, that for a lot of websites is a major sort of challenge in terms of conversion from a viewer to a customer. So cart abandonments are fairly high in that particular case. But if you get a personalized video at that point in time, you might have some of you might have seen that Shah Rukh Khan ad that came about from Cadbury's, where each advertisement was personalized saying, hey, so and so, wishing you a happy Diwali, etc. So like that, if you were to get a personalized message from a celebrity, making it more actionable, or them saying that, hey, if you make a purchase right now, I will give you a discount. We've seen that that could potentially help in improving conversion. So using generative AI to solve for a cart abandonment case, or using generative AI to effectively communicate with your different stakeholders, be it sellers, buyers, investors, or even internal teams. I think we've seen that a lot of use cases like this could potentially help companies completely sort of reinvent the way their workflows are currently organized, and find efficiency and find creative new ways to increase ultimately footfall in a e-commerce case, and conversion at the end of it all. We did a similar exercise with BFSI as well. I won't go into it, but again, similar exercise where how is it that banks can leverage technology such as this to either improve customer service, improve sales, improve marketing, or work better with their stakeholders itself. Which then leads me to talk about or in terms of today specifically, there are certain incumbents that exist, and there are certain a lot of startups that are coming up. So what are benefits for each of these stakeholders in what's out there today? I think from the incumbent standpoint, we are seeing the benefits are largely their distribution, a lot of data that they sit on, of course, access to capital and talent that they have. But I think startups also need to be aware of the fact that they could have better focus. They could work on specific targeted problems that otherwise an incumbent could not necessarily work on, and can come up with good sort of verticalized offerings. So I think the common question that gets asked is, can a startup get distribution before the incumbent gets innovation? And I think the first point in that specifically is something how we at Ideaspring are also looking at solutions. So how is it that I think, or my personal opinion on this is that incumbents might be happier to play a horizontal game here, be across sectors, be across industries, be across functions, and try and have some part to play in each. But I think if you had to get really deep into a particular space, I think a startup can do that a lot better. I spoke to one very interesting startup a couple of months back, which was solving for marketing copy. So social media posts, social media posts that need to be generated by a marketing team, uh, of course, can now use something like a chat GPT to generate that information directly. But I think they've come up with smart integrations to help their customer come up with a final product that is of publishable quality. So, for instance, say you need to write up a 5-slide presentation on drones. I think this is a layer, this company builds a layer on, or has built a layer on top of chat GPT itself and leverages that, but has added nice prompts that allows you to that simplifies your process quite a bit. So if you have to write a 5-slide, if you have to create a 5-slide presentation on drones, you could the product will itself prompt to you saying, okay, how do you want to start this particular presentation? Do you want to start it with a joke? Do you want to start it with a fact? Do you want to start it with a quote? Do you want to start it with a question? Now, yes, you could have asked all of that to ChatGPT yourself, but I think the fact that it understands what sort of a requirement you have and is prompting you to then eventually prompt back to the system what you want is innovative, and they've thought through. So, for instance, when you say, okay, I want to start it with a fact or a statistic, they have an integration built in with Statista. Similarly, if you want to integrate an image into that, they have an integration built in with Getty Images. So you don't need to move in and out of that particular application to complete the whole puzzle. All of the pieces are well integrated into that to provide that. And I actually sorry, took the product for a spin and came up with a good 5-slide presentation, I think within 15 minutes of using it, which I'm sure would have taken a lot longer if I was doing it manually. So I think that solves for a specific vertical or a problem, digs deep, understands what the requirements could be at that level, and has come up with a solution catering to that. But I think even we spoke about the hospital use case, but we could also talk about startups potentially working with proprietary data sets that make it harder for incumbents to have a play on it. I think even in terms of generally thinking from an AI native standpoint, I think there's a lot of legacy baggage that a incumbent will think of in terms of brand reputation, etc., that it can't just abandon everything to just think AI native. I think from that standpoint, a startup can be a lot more agile. And overall, I think we've seen through ChatGPT that simplicity wins. But even this example that I gave, which is slightly more complicated than the interface you see on ChatGPT, but innovating just on a user interface could give you that edge to create a mark, even if technology may not be the biggest differentiator that's out there. That said, I think it's important to understand what the ethical concerns and risks associated with all of this is. I mean, we're obviously very excited by the potential of what all this can provide, but it does come with certain risks and concerns. I think the first is bias and discrimination. One needs to understand that generative AI at the end of the day is the output is based on certain input data, and that input data could have a certain degree of bias or discrimination associated with it. So I think what is the data on which the models have been trained will determine what the output is. And while yes, everybody will, or while everybody would appreciate for all of this to be unbiased, there is scope for bias to creep in and alter what the output will be. So I think policy, etc., you've seen different countries take on a different stand around what policies and regulations should govern this whole space. I think it's good right now that maybe regulation will eventually need to catch up to innovation and not the other way down. Because I think, but yes, there is going to be time and place for regulation to to come about and dictate, for instance, some of these fundamental things that will shape the way a lot of these models generate data. I think intellectual property is another thing you could ask DALI to take a picture of, or to take the picture of Mona Lisa and add a hat to it. And you could say that that's your image that you created. But who actually owns that data? I mean, is it you who gave that prompt? Is it the system that generated it? Or is it the original artist, in this case, Leonardo da Vinci itself? So I think those questions around intellectual property need to be answered. I think it's important for, again, safeguards to be there, and for people to only use data in a lot of these cases which are rightfully or ethically sort of obtained. I think there are ways to do that, but there's also scope for a lot of misuse and malpractice associated with it. We've seen even in social media proliferation of fake news, etc. But I think with the power that a system like this has, I think it's quite scary in terms of what could come. You could have big political leaders, rulers of countries talk in a voice that sounds exactly like them, and in the way they, mannerisms that are very, very sort of uh, uh, identical to how they actually are in person, and saying things that they actually didn't say. And I think it's important for one to eventually sort of realize what is real content and what is synthetically generated content. And I think regulations need to again come about to try and help users distinguish between the two. And I think privacy and security, we're talking about a lot of data that is used in a lot of these models as well. Uh, your faces, your voices, etc. It's going to go into make the model better and better. How secure, safe is all of this data as well? The responsibility of that will sit with big tech companies, and at the same time, policymakers who govern how rules and regulations around all of this need to be set. I think eventually when we talk about the future of work, we've seen that new jobs have been. I mean, we talk a lot about how jobs could potentially be replaced because technology is better than what a human can technically do. We've seen at the same time new jobs being created as well. I think prompt engineer, which is what you see in the cartoon strip there, is one of the strongest sort of, or one of the most sought after jobs now to specifically work on the generative AI side. But even otherwise, I think we spoke a little bit about what sort of an AI strategy companies should have. And the tips on the right are not just for startups that are innovating in AI, but also for companies or incumbents that exist in the space that need to potentially be abreast of what's happening, because I think AI is going to shape everything. A lot of people have called this the next sort of iPhone moment. And I think we're going to see how AI is going to be integrated and be a part of day-to-day life, both on the B2C and the B2B side. But at the same time, I think it's important for companies to understand and figure out how they can leverage it to the best of their capability and go above and beyond to actually continue to stay relevant in this space. And that's where work is also going to sort of go down. Yes, there will be job displacement, but at the same time, I think new work will be created. And I think the gap between idea and creation is only going to reduce with technology like this. And I think the quantum of work or output that comes out of companies is going to get better and better, even if it comes with certain cost upfront. So yeah, largely that. I think you must have seen this sort of cartoon or strip, this meme floating around in social media in the recent past as well. But yeah, I'd like to open it up for questions at this point in time. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot for that presentation. It was surely very detailed and insightful. So thanks for sharing and taking us through that. So yes, we'd like to open up for Q&A now. Let me take you through some of the questions that have already come on the chat. So the first question is by Ajay. He wants to ask you, do you think AI will drive customized chipsets meant for a specific purpose like TPU from Google or more general purpose from NVIDIA?
Ajay, to be honest, I don't think I'm the best to answer this particular question, but I can check it out and I can go over this in more depth and get back to you or get back to Smriti and team on this. I don't have an answer to that.
Sure, no issues, Aniket. You can get back to us on that one. The next question is from Hari. He wants to ask you about startups doing applications over LLMs have a cost for using the API and the GPUs. Do you see any change in the SaaS revenue models, specifically for GAI startups?
Good question. Good question, Hari. Uh, yeah. So I think we're going to see more of usage. I mean, we've anyway been used to, at least what the cloud world has taught us, is that usage basis data is what governs monetization strategy as well. I think we're going to see a similar sort of business model in this side as well. I think even when you see some of the startups that I was speaking to, and all of this is still fairly preliminary, I was also probing them a little bit more on how they're going to monetize from their existing customers or from their customers that they sign up. And a lot of them went down that same angle of saying that, okay, if today, for instance, I need content, if my customer needs content generated to the tune of, let's say, 500 words and X images and so, pricing will be dynamic to the sense that it will incorporate that specific requirement and will generate output basis that, which can then be compared with what I think freelancers today charge anyway in terms of words or on articles published. So I think we're going to see a similar sort of a pricing model, I would say, in terms of uh, how these startups will charge specifically. I think a fixed pricing, like how traditional SaaS is, might not. It might be the case, or might exist for certain limits. But after you hit the limits, I think it will be variable pricing that will be basis data generated, consumed, or outputted.
Right, right. Thanks for that, Aniket. We take the next question. So how would you go about valuing GAI startups who are pre-revenue? Any pointers for that?
Good question. I don't. So in this particular case, see, I don't have, or I can compare it with how we anyway value startups at Ideaspring. So, see, I think one is, of course, competitors that exist. We track rounds that are happening in the space, and then we compare the startup that we are evaluating with the round that just happened for another startup. So to give you an example, we were looking at two video startups at the same time in the GAI space. One of them ended up raising funding from someone else at a certain valuation. The company we were speaking to wanted a higher valuation than that. The one that raised money was on par with others in the space that had raised money at a similar valuation. But the one that we were evaluating arguably had better technology, and therefore I felt it was right in them commanding some sort of a premium. But to be honest, at a pre-revenue stage, there is no science. It's largely art. We try and establish how much of a stake we want in a company at that earlier stage. And as long as it is in the ballpark of what other startups in the space are raising, and if it's an area that we think we are very optimistic about and where we can add value, we will invest in them. To again draw in parallel to the Web3 craze that happened a year and a half back before all of this came about, we were seeing, or even the blockchain type, we were seeing early stage startups without even a product commanding valuations of 30 million, etc., for a $2-3 million raise. So I think in those in specific abnormalities like that, where there is no basis for commanding that sort of a valuation, I think there were a lot of startups at the global scale that were raising at that. But we look at it from each startup standpoint, and we try and evaluate what is it that these guys can do differently, and what's the conviction we have for them to actually create a mark in this space. Ultimately, to be honest, at the pre-revenue stage, the only two parameters are team and market. I think from a team standpoint, very few people anyway have background in generative AI. They might be looking to foray into the space for the first time around. So I think we look at things like entrepreneurial experience, professional networks that they're a part of, and market size. Currently, everybody is the TAM for most startups in the space is fairly large. But I think what we figured was look at verticalized offerings rather than going after the overall market. See if you can grab a higher share in a particular industry, and if you have a strong enough story to do that, we can then discuss valuation, in which case it goes back to what I started off with, which is how are other startups in this space raising money.
Right. Thanks for that, Aniket. There's another question from Ajay. I hear from some of the founders that they want to take open source LLMs and use it and train these with their own data. What's your view on this?
Yeah, I think I covered a little bit on it. So I think it's possible to do so. And I think if the output that you're coming up with after you utilize some of the open models that exist, but with data that you fed in, and you're able to uh, train the models to give you the output that you believe will be useful in a certain case that cannot be found by the open by other products that exist out there. I think there is scope to innovate on that front, and there is scope to create value on that front. Hello, Smriti, can you hear me?
Yes, I think we just lost you for like 10 seconds, Aniket. I think your
Oh,
voice was a little baffled. Yeah.
okay. No, I was saying there is scope to train models with your own data. I would I think one needs to identify why specifically uh, a use case like that, or why specifically use case like that is pertinent to you to sort of create value. And I think from that standpoint, if you've identified a niche use case that isn't being catered to by existing models, and that can be sort of better enhanced with your existing data, with data that you specifically own, I think there is scope for value to be created on that front. I don't know how robust the existing models will be to work on your data, because I think training a lot of the models uh, to on exist, or even the large language models that exist, the output that comes about is basis a lot of iterations that have gone about in the training stage. So I think if the ability to invest that time, effort, money exists to work with the existing models, you could do it. It is one step cheaper than potentially building your own model. But we'll need to understand whether the output is something basis which business decisions can be taken for you to leverage value in the industry that this particular use case is applicable.
Right. A follow-up on that, Aniket, on the LLM. So do you see an LLM for India specifically getting done?
Hari, I don't have a take on that. I think maybe yes, but I don't know if it's the priority today to get it done. I think there's a lot that can be leveraged with the existing LLMs that are there. I think until we identify specific use cases where uh, LLM, or if it could be basis confidential data that we don't want to expose to existing open LLMs that exist. So I think from those use cases standpoint, I think it makes sense to generate. But I think right now, because it's still at such an exploratory stage, it might be a couple of months till something on this front might actually take off.
Right. So I think another follow-up from Hari on Google and Microsoft. So where do you see a concentration of AI startups in India, geography-wise? And also, how do you see Google or Microsoft leading the space in comparison to OpenAI or other GAI companies?
AI startups in India, I don't think they are, at least the ones that we've spoken to, I don't think they've been specific to one particular geography. For instance, we have a portfolio company itself, which is in the conversational AI space, that is operating out of Calcutta, which isn't, I would say, which isn't, I would say, a place that you would associate with innovation of this front, but it works because they've built the right team there. One startup that we were evaluating in the video space was actually remotely located with people in Punjab, people in Delhi, people in Bombay. I think the notion that a lot of these startups need to come out of Bangalore, I think COVID has ensured that things can happen remotely as well. I haven't seen a geographical concentration anywhere. I think it's, in some sense, maybe the data will suggest that a place like Bangalore is better suited for something like this just because of abundance of talent. But I think because there's lesser innovation happening on the technology side and more so on the business model side and speed to market, I think it's a good opportunity for even non-startup places to sort of build something and not be restricted to one of the tier one cities. To answer your second question, also, do you see Google or Microsoft leading the space in comparison to OpenAI and other GAI companies? I think this touches upon the point that I covered as well. I think Google, Microsoft will take on a more horizontal position in the value chain across sectors, across functions, across industries. I think other GAI companies, at least on the application side, I would think would need to start off with more verticalized offerings. We need to establish stickiness. I'll give you an example of a startup that I spoke to in this space that was trying to sell its solution to multiple industries. So they were selling, again, video-based generated generative AI video offering to people across different industries. And I think when I spoke to potential customers, I could feel that the stickiness wasn't really established because they were spreading far and wide, but weren't necessarily understanding all of the use cases within that particular sector to come up with a more sort of robust or concentrated offering, which is what led me also to come up with that exercise of how video specifically can be used in e-commerce or in BFSI. So I think Google, Microsoft will continue to operate at a horizontal level. I don't think, at least in the immediate future, till I think it is established which area is most lucrative for disruption, will they get into verticalized offerings. I think that's where startups can play a larger part and come up with more sort of stickiness and value creation.
Right. So I think, Aniket, in the interest of time, we can just take one last question. That's again from Ajay. So how is that chat GPT model is trained on data in the example of a limb that you gave, which needs Internet of Thing data, and then be able to generate a limb? Can you explain, or this would need proprietary data used to train a specific LLM?
Yes. I didn't mean Chat GPT would do this, but I meant there is a scope for data to be collected from one source and processed across a whole or different models, different solutions to come up with an output that is better created than ever before. So data in that particular case is personalized data, because if I, for instance, walk with a certain limp because I don't have, let's call it a leg, and it might be different from somebody else who needs a prosthetic limb as well. In my particular case, my data is going to be useful to, my data will be used to, the data that's collected through my sensors, etc., can be used to then feed into the model, and the model will then be able to say that, okay, a limb designed in certain way or in so and so way is what is best useful for me, which might not be, which will surely not be which will surely not be useful to anybody else with a similar problem, because each case will be unique in that particular case. So I think personalized offerings in healthcare can be better, or better solutions can come about for personalized offerings in healthcare, which previously didn't exist. Also, because it's complemented with technology such as 3D printing, etc., which which is a deviation from generative AI, but I think it's a good opportunity today for different technologies to be used to solve for a particular problem.
Right. So I think, Aniket, we've asked you a lot of questions already, but there's just one last one from Prashant. So have you come across any startup in the code generation space? And he needs to ask you this.
Prashant, I haven't interacted with any. I know there is a lot of activity in this space. I've spoken to people who have used Copilot, etc. And they say their job has become a lot simpler. I haven't come across any. Hoping to see some in this space because I think a lot of onus on developer talent or I think sourcing of good developers has always been difficult. I think India, even with the amount of engineers we produce, we still think hiring, at least on the engineering side, has always been difficult. But I think with what this can do on the code generation side, there's a lot of obvious applications for this. And we continue to sort of look for startups in this space. But no, I don't have a first-hand example as of now that I can use.
That's absolutely fine, Aniket. And thanks a lot for answering all the questions. I'd request, in the interest of time, I'd request the audience, if you do have any more questions, you can certainly write to us and we can, Aniket can give us an answer to those questions post the session. So, I mean, just to wrap this up, Aniket, thanks a lot for, very, very detailed information that you've provided us and truly very informative. And thank you for answering all the questions very patiently. I'm sure the audience had a great time listening to you. We really appreciate you taking out the time today, and we do hope we can do more sessions with you in the future. Once again, thank you to all the participants for taking out time for the GAI or IAN series. And we look forward to engaging with you in future sessions. I would like to wrap up the session on this note. So thank you again, everybody, for joining in today, and a very good night to everyone, and have a great rest of the evening.
Thank you. Thanks, Smriti.
Thanks, Aniket.